Hello and welcome to Editor's Pick, a War Elephant podcast, episode number 15. I'm joined with my fellow war editor, War Elephant exec Phil,
Hello.
and also Dr. Jeremy Teigen. Welcome, Doctor.
It is great to be with you.
So tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Sure. I am a professor of political science at Ramapo College in New Jersey. I have been teaching at this small public liberal arts college for quite some time now. I started in 2005. I came to Ramapo from the University of Texas, where I got my PhD. And that was after a bachelor's at the University of Wisconsin. I primarily write about two big areas, two irons in the fire. One is the politics of place, the political geography, the idea of where we live shapes some of our political identities and behaviors. And the other big iron in the fire is the politics of military service, or if there's a Venn diagram with elections and military service, previous military service, I'm kind of at the overlap there, along with a few other people that write on this question of that kind of pokes at the ideas like, why are military veterans so numerically overrepresented in American politics, just as a proportion of how many veterans are in the electorate. Veterans, any way you slice them, are quantitatively overrepresented in our elections. So those are the two big areas I work on. I teach classes at the college, from American Government 101 to some electives, and I guess I'm famous for teaching the required methodology course. That's the one that drags my course eval averages down a bit, I think. But that's me in a nutshell. I live not too far from the George Washington Bridge in lovely Bergen County, New Jersey.
So I have been informed that your scholarship and lectures seem to indicate you are a strong proponent of realignment theory. Could you give us a bird's eye view of what that theory says and how it's relevant today?
Ooh, the first part of that question is way easier than the second. So one of my mentors in grad school was Walter Dean Burnham, who was the student of the sort of father of this idea of critical elections and realignment theory, who is V.O. Key. And what people like Key and Burnham described was that American elections, up until recently, so big asterisk on how it applies now is open to debate. But if you look at the broad sweep of American electoral history from roughly Jackson through the Vietnam War, it's pretty clear you can see patterns that emerge where one, instead of like a ping pong ball game where Democrats win one, the Republicans win one, or the Whigs win one and the Democrats win one, and maybe one party wins a couple. Instead, if you can find that there are generational chunks of time where one party is a dominant party, and they come into power in a burst of electoral change that sort of takes whatever the previous tapestry of American politics was, kind of rips it up and sews it together in a different way. And those times of transition we refer to as like a 4 to 6 year cycle of a couple of presidential elections and congressional elections in between, where there's really transformational change that occurs. Big chunks of the electorate either enter or leave the electorate, change sides. Sometimes parties, as in the 1850s, disappear, like the Whigs, but turnout's usually high. There's usually some kind of strife going on So the classic periods you think of are, big transformational change in the 1850s and 60s surrounding, the sectional conflict over the expansion of slavery and the prosecution of the Civil War. And then the new Republican Party is dominant for a generation until roughly the turn of the century. And the Republican Party no longer sees itself as the, venerated party that won the Civil War. Instead, sort of rebrands itself a laissez-faire, pro-business, metal standard, money policy party of capitalism that more resembles the Republican Party we know, at least before Trump. And then these Republicans are dominant until the economic distress of the late 1920s, and Democrats come in, and another period of transformational change occurs, and now Democrats are dominant, winning most of the presidential elections, winning most of the time they're in the majority in both chambers for another generation, from FDR to JFK.
And most of it was FDR.
So the second part of your question is much harder, which is if we can identify the Jacksonian Revolution in the 1820s or the birth of the Republican Party in the 1850s and 60s, and the Williams Jennings Bryan in 1896 and the change that occurred with the Republican Party in defeating him, and of course the stock market crash and Great Depression of the 1920s and 30s are pretty clear breakpoints. Like you can very easily waltz into an undergraduate classroom and talk about these historical events and see the patterns that I'm describing. Where the debate kind of begins is what happens after, roughly 1968, early 1970s, when there's no longer it's hard to identify which party is the dominant one. In the Reagan 80s, yes, he was a popular president who won re-election about as robustly as one can in 1984, but the Democrats remained in charge of Congress for most of those years. Bill Clinton won twice, but his first time was with 43% of the popular vote. George W. Bush, reelected, but again, Democrats in control with very, very narrow elections. In fact, one of them, he doesn't even win the popular vote. So since the some refer to it as a de-alignment of the electorate in the late 1960s, early 1970s, we've kind of entered a period that re-election theory doesn't do a great job of explaining, because we don't have transformative elections. We've had nothing but very, very close elections for in recent memory, and this clear periodicity that does a pretty good job of organizing and describing what happened between, like I say, roughly Jackson to Nixon is it just doesn't work very well in recent politics, certainly not since the turn of the century.
So I guess I'll start with the question. You may have seen reports or video that about 20 or 25 men in uniform took part in the activities on Capitol Hill last week. Yet there seems to be this sort of normative presupposition that it's best for the military to stay above politics. How will the image, at least, of men in uniform, even if they went rogue, being members of the protest group, sort of harm the military's image as being above politics?
Very complicated question. So let's kind of put some guardrails on the conversation, because too often in both mainstream journalism as well as the wild west of social media, there's a tendency to conflate military veterans with people who are active duty and who are currently serving. And retired and simply post-service members are free to do politically whatever they want. That the actual UCMJ, Uniform Court of Military Justice, rules that apply to active duty members are far more ironclad, and that restricts the political expression rights of members of the military. Members of the military do not have a First Amendment guarantee of freedom of expression, and CMR scholars abound would agree that this is probably a good thing, that we try to keep our armed forces away from not political fights, because they are political, right? I mean, they're a part of our government. They are bought and paid for by the U.S. Congress. They are directed to go by, they're ordered by a commander in chief who's a politician. So if we think that politics is basically the redistribution of power and the expression of public policy, well, military policy is politics. So it's not that we want to pull the military away from politics itself. Rather, we want to keep them away from any imagery around our parties and partisanship that might make them look like they're choosing a side. And you may recall from the campaign trail, a woman in uniform went to a Joe Biden rally, and that's an explicit no. That is forbidden by the UCMJ. For the same reason that, along a similar logic that the Hatch Act that restricts government employees from basically campaigning on the job, so that if your mail carrier comes up to your door with a giant yay for Trump or dump Trump sticker on their uniform, that's a violation of the Hatch Act, because we don't want our government to be a tool of partisan campaigning. For even more important reasons, we don't want our armed forces to even have the appearance. So back to that breakdown of the guardrails. So a fad of, we'll say, roughly the last 4 presidential election cycles is that politicians have gotten woke to the idea that getting retired flag officers, former admirals and generals, who are no longer in the service, but we still call them admirals and generals in shorthand. They've gotten them pulled up on the stage at nominating conventions. They're kind of trying to circle endorsements out of them. And while that is not technically a violation, because they go from when they separate from the service, they go back to being a civilian and they get their First Amendment back. But the idea that they're
clearly skirting the line and flouting the intention.
Indeed. And look, everybody's entitled to their politics, including current and past soldiers. It's just what they say about it in public. Some officers in American history have been radical apolitical figures, like William Tecumseh Sherman famously never voted. He didn't even think it was appropriate for Army officers to participate in elections. That's how much of a firewall he wanted between partisan politics and the armed forces. So I don't endorse it. I don't endorse the endorsement. I wish they wouldn't. But I would be afraid of whatever rule that would be put in place to restrict it would probably face, instant First Amendment litigation that it wouldn't survive. I just wish that they would carry their professionalism with them.
And also maybe insist on referring to themselves as civilians rather than, admiral or general.
Yeah. One of our most famous general turned presidents, Dwight Eisenhower, was profoundly concerned about that when he was contemplating heeding the calls from both parties that he run under their banner after World War II in the 1952 election. In writing my book, I spent an entire week at the Eisenhower Presidential Library in Kansas.
Perhaps you could tell us which book this was.
My book from 2018 is called Why Veterans Run, and it explores, tries to answer that the question I posed earlier, which is why veterans are so quantitatively overrepresented in politics. More than half of the individuals who have run for president on a major party nomination have been military veterans, and there's no way that half of American men have been military veterans. And so something about our politics pulls them, or something about military service pushes them into politics, or more likely a combination of both. And so in writing that book, not all presidential candidates have sort of an equal level of salience with their military service. Walter Mondale and Mike Dukakis did serve some time in uniform, but it wasn't a very big part of their life. In fact, it was a very trivial part of their life. And so I didn't need to spend much time. But for someone like Dwight Eisenhower, for whom military service is basically his defining characteristic and attribute, the reason people know him, the thing that makes him a not just a viable presidential candidate, but one that was earned a nomination and then election and re-election, is that he was very careful. He thought it was a dangerous precedent, and so he did what he could to never bring those trappings of his military career into his civilian electioneering and campaigning. These days, I go through.
That brings
I
to
go
mind
through
the question
all
of
the
President
every
George W.
congressional
Bush.
cycle. I look at every course or every campaign website for House challengers, and trust me when I tell you, I do it so you don't have to. But if anybody has a hint of military service in the background, they make a really big deal out of it. There's going to be pictures from them in uniform, and if they're not a veteran, they try to bring old Uncle Louis, who was a Korean War veteran, into the picture and try to borrow some of that civic legitimacy and prestige that can be harvested there. Eisenhower did none of that. He did none of that. Attempt to sort of campaign on his medals. He tried to distance himself as far as he could from that in a very conscious way. It was something he was profoundly concerned about.
So we have a really, I think, interesting question from the chat. Gideon asks, wouldn't the fact that Ross Perot ran in 1992 along with the two major party candidates be both a reason that Bill Clinton won only 43% of the popular vote, as well as a sign of an ongoing realignment? Do you feel like we can make that kind of recent judgment on patterns?
I'm uncomfortable making it. It's a good question, and from Gideon there, the quite right mathematically. The reason that Bill Clinton was able to saunter in with an easy electoral college victory, while having not even a majority of popular votes, is because there was a Texan by the name of H. Ross Perot that won some 20 million votes across the country, just never enough in one place to win a single electoral college vote. So mathematically quite right. But that's not the only defining characteristic of a critical election or a realigning election. Turnout is usually huge, massive. Turnout in the Civil War elections was higher than the years previous and subsequent. Same with 1930s midterms, 1932, because the electorate's really fired up. When we talk about turnout being sort of normal at roughly 6 out of 10 eligible voters, it's going to be higher for a true critical election. If somebody who studies these things profoundly would have more criteria for what a critical election is, but high turnout, third party rumblings is another sign. Back to Gideon's question, the Perot one is a lot less like the third party entrance of the Republicans in the late 1850s, though, because instead of taking a position on an issue like the expansion of slavery, the way the Republicans were able to come up with a clear one, whereas the Whigs could not come up with a clear one because they were too geographically reliant on Southern Whigs who refused to let the party take a position on the expansion of slavery. H. Ross Perot just picked up basically a single issue that everyone knew about, but both parties were, putting their fingers in their ears and saying, la, 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 don't look here. And that was the budget deficit and debt. So great question, but, true critical elections, true realigning elections sort of have a clear before what politics look like, and then a different clear what looks like it afterward. And for a lot of election scholars, it's just not clear. We seem to be in a period of intense polarization and very, very narrowly fought presidential elections with a lot of the same battlegrounds year in, year out. And a lot of, parties losing seats like the Democrats did in the House this time. No one with a clear mandate, nobody with a clear majority. That seems to be the sort of working definition, which is, kind of the opposite of what we're talking about with, say, the Democrats during the New Deal, where the only time they lose a presidential election is when the guy who killed Hitler is running in 1952 and 1956.
So, the Democratic Party, since George Floyd was killed, has been trying to take a less forceful approach to law enforcement, using things like social workers and more restorative tactics. But Capitol Police seems to be getting a black eye every 10 minutes. You had the story out of the AP this morning saying that they turned down help from Homeland Security on 6 separate occasions. Do you think the embarrassment that Capitol Police is facing in light of what happened last week is going to force the Democrats to rethink their position on police reform going forward?
I don't think so. The events from the 6th, I think are sufficient. I think Democrats have the ability to put sufficient daylight between those two ideas, because I don't know what you guys were doing, but I couldn't put the remote down. I almost never watch television news, but I started seeing the beginnings of it on Twitter, and I couldn't eat it. I was just sick to my stomach. It was just a different set of situation, just a completely different situation that I think won't be difficult for Democrats to keep daylight between, so that whatever failures the Capitol Police, and they seem to be growing in numerous terms, but obviously still a lot more facts to find out. Whereas the very clear clarity of George Floyd's death, and just how banal it appeared to the officers involved, it's just simply so far easier to digest than the very obvious complexity of what happened on the 6th. But I'm not going to pretend to have all the answers to that question. That's we're learning more and more about what happened there. But the short answer is I perceive that the Democrats will be able to keep enough daylight between those two things.
And getting back to the men in uniform at the protests, the UCMJ says that if you're court-martialed for sedition, you face the death penalty. Do you think that those men, and they're even throwing around Michael Flynn getting court-martialed, do you think they'll actually be court-martialed? And if so, how likely are they to actually be executed?
That probability is very low. The capital punishment, that is. Again, I don't know the numbers. I've only seen what you've seen on Twitter. I believe there was an active duty officer, a female stationed at Fort Bragg. Unconfirmed. This is just things I saw flying by me on Twitter today, that she was actually already being separated. Like her papers are already in, and so her date is already coming for reasons I don't know. And so, the guy that had the tactical helmet on, that he's with the zip ties, I don't remember the names, but he's retired. So he's not going to be, prosecuted under the UCMJ under any circumstances. Anybody there who is currently active duty or National Guard reserves certainly takes a far more nuanced impression of the oath they took than the way I understand that oath. Very hard to imagine someone, especially the woman who was killed. Ironically, when she was in the Air Force, one of her posts was Capitol Defense, and then to be later in life, swept up in a mob and being actually at the vanguard of a assault on the thing that you were once posted to protect is difficult to swallow. It really, I still haven't fully processed it.
So we often say the cliche that we study history so that we can learn from it, progress from it, perhaps avoid mistakes that have been made in the past in similar patterns. Is there anything you can tell a right-leaning audience, but of course we do have centrist and liberal viewers as well, who are very concerned? I mean, I think most of us are concerned about the state of our country right now. What you think we might be able to do or look out for? I think too many of us spend time, just really agitated about stuff we can't do anything about. So I'm wondering if you have any things from studying the patterns of the last 300 years of our history.
So, two in very clear, pardon me, I'd be happy to speak directly to disappointed Trump voters who really feel like, the time that has elapsed between the election and now feels very difficult. I've had a kind of running conversation with a lot of colleagues, and I just want to remind, disappointed Trump voters here that this is it's normal to lose elections. And what normally happens is the losing party usually just recedes out of view, calls the other candidate, congratulates them, and then we're off to the races on who's going to be what cabinet secretary and what the first 100 days is going to look like. And we kind of forget the other party exists until, they start running congressional campaigns, and then the invisible primary starts happening. But the Republicans were not afforded that luxury. And they, Donald Trump, the president, in his refusal to accept the results of the election, have forced the entire party to maintain that posture, and it's hard. It's just makes this transition far more difficult. I mean, it's always difficult when you lose elections. I don't share
more
my
than
own...
difficult. It's incredibly destructive because it destroys the people who do have a political future's chances at being able to become effective for the next term.
That's it. Is that you're hitting the nail on the head, which is in normal non-Trump times, you lose an election and it's you go off in the wilderness and you're going to figure out in the next cycle, you're probably going to win the House back. You're probably going to win some seats back in the next midterms and charge up some energies, whether it's, like the Tea Party after Obama's first election. Who knows? You might win back the House. Who knows? But presidential politics will come back into play, and the next generation, the party turns the page and almost never nominates the same person, or even considers it. And so we're looking to the future, right? And Donald Trump didn't let the Republican Party have that, and it's normal. It's healthy to turn the page and look to who's next and who's going to be the upcoming leaders for. It's hard to imagine the other people on the stage in 2016 being able to pick up the pieces. Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz and Jeb Bush and that crowd don't, I don't have a crystal ball, but they don't feel like they're that they have, legitimacy within the party to carry that torch. And so, like, Donald Trump not leaving the stage is making it hard for the party to do what it's supposed to do, which is figure out who they're going to be in 2024. Who are they going to nominate? What are they going to be about? Their capitulation on not having a party platform and just saying that Donald Trump's Twitter account is our party platform, that too is probably not good for party development, down ballot races, recruiting, all the things that parties need to do to charge the batteries back up and get competitive, because they'll be back. The idea that Nancy Pelosi will be speaker for more than 24 more months seems very difficult, and the ability for Republicans to move past Donald Trump is vital for their priming for the 24 race.
You've made the argument that you think that campaigns only matter at the margins. Do you think the Georgia Senate campaign was one of those where Donald Trump's belief that the Georgia election was stolen from him might have hurt the Republican Party in those two Senate races?
We'll know more when we get some more data, but the fact that there wasn't a ton of in-person voting supports that argument. I think that a lot of the as we learned in the general election in November last year, the Republicans do well on election day, and Democrats were more voting early. So very speculative. I think there's a lot more to learn about those runoffs, and they're both, and again, very close elections. But that I mean, it even if both Republicans won by whiskers, I was really hoping they wouldn't start spiking footballs, because for Democrats to do that well in runoffs, in Dixie, with their previous standard bearer Donald Trump, flying the flag, and he just it kind of reminded me of his weird get out the vote strategy before the general election, which is don't vote it by mail. If I were the campaign manager in a battleground state, hearing the president say that, I think I'd be tearing my ever-growing hair out.
Yeah, I mean, the Republican Party in California managed to make back some of the terrific losses they had in 2018 by really organizing a ground game of getting mail-in ballots, ballot harvesting on the Republican side, as well as the well-established Democratic ballot harvesting machine over there. So I think that, much as I personally have philosophical problems with mail-in ballots and absentee voting, it's a fact of our voting process now, and Republicans refusing to get Republicans who want to do that engaged in that process is suicide, which I think is why I 100% blame Donald Trump both for his loss at the presidency and the loss of the Senate, because what he did was beyond idiotic.
I want to get back to Phil's question, but before, I mean, I've only worked on one campaign, but I've been writing about them for 20 years, and campaign 101 is encourage people to vote in whatever mechanism that's being offered. Having whether it's a ground game, whether it's select endorsements or ad buys, or the latest greatest Facebook, Twitter algorithm advertising, whatever it is, you do more of it to get more people to participate, especially among your base.
So I want to maybe start looking forward. One of the things that my kids will be studying about when they look back at the Trump presidency is the Russia investigation. And there are similar allegations that Joe Biden's son engaged in corrupt dealings abroad. Do you think that those allegations will color Joe Biden's presidency the way they did to Donald Trump?
Um, I don't think so. And again, I have no special knowledge any more than I'm a man who reads the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and the Washington Post every day. I don't watch television news, but I do know about the echo chambers and it seemed like the Hunter Biden story was definitely asymmetrically promoted in the news silos that we all, I greatly lament that we live in. It's, I grew up with a Republican Party that's basic orientation to foreign policy is do whatever annoys Moscow. And so I've never quite understood the president's reluctance to criticize Vladimir Putin. I don't have any special information or knowledge that anyone else doesn't have access to, but that lack of criticism, the undercutting of NATO, these are just things that I think would be unthinkable to Reagan era Republicans or even the 20 years intervening.
Well, I definitely think that George W. Bush wouldn't have wanted to undermine NATO given his coalition building instinct. We have our chief editor, Christine, joining us for our last few questions. Christine, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you for letting me in since I was so late. Welcome, Professor Teagan. I'm very excited that you agreed to come on today.
I'm glad to be with you.
I'm in this kind of probably a similar situation as you are. I'm starting classes tomorrow teaching. So
we killed our spring break and are starting this semester late this term to try to contend with the curve. So I actually have a little bit more breathing room this January than usual, but I am starting to feel that pressure. Yes.
I'm a little worried because I teach lab classes, so going online is less than simple. So I was wondering, you sent quite a link of documents or interesting questions, and I was fascinated by them all. But I was really wondering what you find going on at the local level. Do you find what's going around at the local level to be indicative of national politics at all?
There's one of the most famously repeated sort of folklore of American political history is Speaker of the House Tip O'Neill's repeated claim. He was Speaker of the House in the 1980s during the Reagan years. He famously repeated the phrase that all politics is local. Is that yes, voters are motivated to vote for presidential candidates and think about national issues when they vote for president, but for anything down ballot from there, the more you can be Senator Pothole, the better your chances are, and the more locally oriented you are, the more often you come back to district and keep yourself grounded in local politics, the better off you're going to be, because that means you're serving your constituents when you're making decisions on the floor. And that old saw has gotten really tired. It seems like these days you could almost reverse it completely and say all politics is national. The things that motivate people, I don't know if it's the social media silos. I don't know if it's hyperpolarization that started on the Hill. And there's a lot of things that we can kind of blame for that, including, name the usual suspects, gerrymandering and redistricting that creates a class of basically, permanent incumbents that, with a few exceptions of, 50 to 80 races every cycle, that might be close to competitive. Most of the districts are heavily tilted one way or the other, and there's not likely to be any seat turnover. But that doesn't explain why the Senate too has become quite polarized. So it's not just redistricting and gerrymandering that's created polarization, but that to your point, Christine, is that it feels like, now it doesn't mean that local politics is irrelevant. I am an elected leader in my little town. I'm a school board member, so it's not as if I, don't believe in local politics, and I'm certainly actively engaged in it. But as a guy who looks at polling data and looks at what animates voters, the current mood of tribalism seems to animate a lot of people at the national level far more than local issues, or at least the trend has moved more national. So if we can say that Tip O'Neill remains a little bit relevant, well, maybe the pendulum has swung far towards the national, and maybe we could hope for a pendulum shift backward to something more that blends a balance of national and local politics animating people.
I think from my experience, I was knocking on doors for a special state assembly election out in western New Jersey. And I think the sort of 24-hour news cycle in which Donald Trump took out 23 and a half hours of it definitely had an effect on the races. Like, I would knock on a door, and the first question I'd get is, did Donald Trump call this person a rhino? And it was a no-name state assembly candidate. So the sort of expectation that Donald Trump will have commented on everything and everyone seems to have permeated down to the lowest levels of government, and really impacts the way people think about local issues that Donald Trump frankly doesn't care about.
100% agree.
Yeah, I was wondering because I went to Meet the Candidate Forum this year for for a state representative in a highly contested election. And nearly everyone who showed up was concerned about, do you support Donald Trump on this policy? Do you support Donald Trump on that policy? And at the time, it really shocked me. I'd never seen anything quite like it. And I was wondering if if there's a path out of this, back towards local politics. Is that something that can be brought back? And how would conservatives go about doing that?
Oh, that's a big ask.
It's okay. You can just pick out a piece of it and answer what you want to answer.
Well, okay. So, when political science professors get up in front of, poli-sci or American Government 101, sometime in the first few weeks, of course, what do we talk about? Federalism. The fact that our country, relies very heavily on state and local governments to do a great deal of our public policy action. And, the thing that's in our headlines right now is the rollout of the vaccines has been a very uneven pastiche of mess. And, our hyper-localism and, like here in New Jersey, local teeny tiny municipalities have a great deal of political power. We devolve a lot of public policy outward, and, the failure of these various state entities to roll these vaccine or the beginnings of these vaccine inventories out is just going to be the thing that's on all our PowerPoints when we're teaching federalism for the next couple of years. And that's just simply never going to happen in a country with a more unitary system, like, most, European democracies. So we're simultaneously doing exactly what Christine is hoping, that we can somehow, make local politics animate people and not have to have a Donald Trump litmus test, as Phil says, for county coroners or anything way down ballot. At the same time, recognizing that it's our local politics that does, most of the redistribution, right? Your property taxes are paying for, local cops and schools, and that's a big chunk of the redistribution, even though very few people vote in those elections, if they're not on the November ballot. And so, almost ironically, the elections that have the highest turnout are for presidential elections where one, a voter has the least likely chance of having their vote matter, but also their sort of connection to the candidate couldn't be more distant. So we simultaneously need to try to figure out how to bring the political polarization temperature down. And if that means, piecing together, local politics and worrying about climbing the rungs up rather than caring about what the guy at the top of the ladder thinks about our down ballot candidates and local issues, that would be good. At the same time, recognizing that, the power of the federal government to help states roll these things out, might come at the cost of some state autonomy, but if it gets a vaccine in my arm faster, I'm all for it.
I think this is also an opportunity to remind our viewers that you really need to actually read the Constitution for the federal government and your state constitution so that you understand what policies are going to affect you. Phil Murphy is never going to build the wall along the Delaware River. So whether or not your state assemblyman agrees with building a wall shouldn't be that important to you, unless, of course, you live in the Rio Grande Valley. And you should really focus more on things that do matter, which for Northern New Jersey, that'll be things like the Gateway Tunnel Project or, controlling the deer and bear population. Those are things you should be getting upset at if your politician doesn't agree with you, not whether or not we need more oil drilling off the coast of Alaska.
That's a great point, Phil. And the parties need to be good at understanding that they're going to have both red state and blue state members, and understanding that there's going to be diversity, and you can't use the exact same set of talking points and ads and priorities. For example, the deductible property tax, blue state tax, basically that Republicans got behind. Well, it's great for Texas Republicans. It's horrible for New Jersey Republicans. Obviously it's a difficult thing to bridge. But the bigger the size of the chasm between the moderates and the extreme portions of the party, also make it really hard for our presidential candidates, right? Think about the journey that Mitt Romney had to take to become the Republican nominee, right? He's a blue state Republican that basically invents Obamacare, right? Emphasizes, pro-choice positions while remaining pro-life personally. And then he has to go to South Carolina and win them over in a primary. So he changes his tune a little bit, or at least, maybe it's the same lyrics, but he's got to shift he's got to move some notes around. And then zip back to the center after he's accomplished the nomination. If you put a T-shirt on Etsy that says "Repeal McGovern Fraser," I will buy it at almost any price.
Yeah, and I think sort of as a corollary to that, I think the Republican Party really shot itself in the foot, making its official party platform, "We support the America First agenda." Because if you're a purple district Republican who was trying to run away from Trump and your party's literal platform is just Donald Trump by name, you got no shot. And it certainly hurt my purple district Republican candidate. He ended up losing by 7 points, even though our district is Republican +3, according to Cook. And I'm sure my district is not the only one that ran away from our candidate because Trump's name was attached to it.
I think one of the barometers for trying to make sense of the 2020 elections, not just the top of the ballot, but down ballot, especially for the higher federal races for the U.S. Senate and U.S. House, is where did Trump, underperform the local Republicans, in the gubernatorial and the Senate and the House races, compared to where he was in 16. And I know everyone's excited about turnout and the fact that Donald Trump, did pick up a record number of general election votes. Well, turnout was high. A rising tide's going to float all the boats. So I like to zoom in on the proportions and sort of treat turnout as a separate entity rather than look at total ballots in places. So I think I agree, Phil. Looking at at the political geography of where proportionately, not in absolute terms, but proportionately, where Trump underperformed his own 2016 numbers, how do you do vis-a-vis the other Republicans on the ballot is the way that I'm just beginning to start looking at general election data. Right now, I'm kind of focusing on House races because I'm tracking the fortunes of those military veterans who are running that I described earlier. But I will, eventually get to upper presidential and Senate races too.
So I guess looking forward at 2022, the census data is going to go public within the coming month, and we're going to know how many House seats New York loses. Should they lose more than one seat, do you think that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is going to be gerrymandered out of a seat? And if so, is that going to be the end of her, or will she move on to other
that's
things?
never going to happen because Fox News will never let that happen because they make way too much money off of her. Clickbait. Just find me a Fox News, webpage daily that doesn't have her red lipstick somewhere, somewhere within 2 page downs on the website. No, seriously, it's tough here in New Jersey. As Phil knows, when you lose a seat in the reapportionment, and that's the process by which the federal government counts noses in all 50 states, and then divides by 435 to figure out proportionally what percentage of America you are. So if New Jersey is 2.3% of America, then New Jersey gets 2.3% of 435. And now New York is not losing people. It's just that the Sunbelt states are growing far faster than this part of the country. And so your Floridas and your Texases and Arizonas are just proportionally growing faster, both demographically and via migration. And so they're gaining seats, and places like New Jersey and New York are losing them, just in general trends. And here in New Jersey, we went from 13 seats to 12 in 2011, and it is the most knives out, cutthroat version of musical chairs you've ever seen. And states can do different things because the feds tell states how many seats they get, but it's up to the states to decide how they're going to redraw their districts. And New Jersey, for example, shamelessly and out in public with a straight face says that their redistricting strategy that Republicans and Democrats basically agree on is to protect incumbents to increase their seniority in Congress so that they can bring home goodies with better committee assignments. They just say this in the open. And so when they made their map in 2011, there were arguably two, competitive seats, 2 or 3, depending on what you call competitive. So I'm no expert in New York politics, but it's unlikely that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is going to be on the losing side of one of those knives out musical chairs fights, because she's a rising star. I mean, if the conversation is about when is she going to try to primary Schumer, it's unlikely she's going to be the first to hit the bricks in some kind of Albany coup. But again, I don't have any inside information. It just seems that she would be an unlikely victim in if that becomes the battle. Wouldn't it be easier for Albany to make life harder on upstate Republican districts? And since they're now in charge of Albany, I would suspect that would be their tendency, not AOC. But I don't know anything inside baseball.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Deacon. Thank you, Phil and Christine, for joining us.
I have to say, in the spirit of it used to be that I could get my name pronounced Tigan with impunity, but there's now a celebrity who goes by Tegan, even though she knows it's wrong. So I just want to make sure I go on record.
I apologize for that.
No
Professor
worries.
Tigan.
It happens all the time.
Actually, I
All the
also
time.
have a cousin whose name is Tegan, and it's spelled exactly the same way.
Tell your cousin you should go to Norway and see how they say it.
Well, I believe it's an Irish first name.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
different.
I
then.
think it's probably a variant of Tegan with an A. But anyway, Dr. Tigan, thank you so much for joining us. This was very, I think it kind of gave us a break while still being connected to the things that are going on today. I appreciate the kind of research. The War Elephant really prizes three qualities of research, respect, and relaxed. And I think you really modeled all of those things today. So I hope that other people enjoyed that. I know we had some really good questions this time, so I appreciated your willingness to engage with that.
That's
If
great to
you
hear.
are,
I'm glad to
Yeah.
glad to hear it. My publisher would kill me if I didn't remind viewers that Why Veterans Run is available in softback, hardback, as a Kindle book, as well as an audio book.
yeah, if you email me a link, I'll put it in the show description.
Absolutely.
And I want to encourage anyone who's watching to join the War Elephant Discord community. The link is already in the episode description. We're also on Quora, which is where we post most of our answers and written content, especially from our founder, John Davis. He is working really hard on a lot of stuff right now with everything that's going on, but keep following us. We'll keep providing content. The Discord is full of conversations like this. Dr. Tigan's not on there, but he's more than welcome to, and we have a lot of people who have very varied perspectives and expertises, a lot of people with a lot of expertise on the Discord community. So feel free to join that, and anyone who's watching, we would love it if you'd also join us. And so I would like to thank everyone for watching, and we'll see you